Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to our third webinar in the Enacting Education for Sustainable Development webinar series. My name is Szilvia Szőlősi. I'm head of the University Strategy Office at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, partner to the CHARM-ED Alliance, the same as Trinity College Dublin. Warm welcome to the colleagues and speakers of today's webinar and the University of Barcelona. These three CHARM-ED partner institutions form part of a so-called CHARM-ED project, which is a special call by the CHARM-ED Alliance supporting educational innovation to be shared among the partners. But we are also very happy to have colleagues from outside the Alliance listening in on this webinar, which is going to share an innovative and very exciting teaching practice and methodology developed by Trinity College Dublin and reviewed and adapted in the context of our CHARM-ED project. Please note that today's webinar will be recorded and the recording shared later on. During the webinar, I will be muting all the participants. Only, of course, our speakers will have their voice, but at the end of the webinar, there will be a dedicated question and answer section for you. So please collect all your thoughts and questions that you would like to ask. Please also use the chat to pose your questions, because we will keep an eye on that, and perhaps even during the discussion, colleagues can reflect on those questions, but at the latest, at the end of the webinar, we will have this dedicated session. I will not take more of our precious time today, but give the floor to our esteemed colleagues from Trinity College Dublin, who today, after the first two webinars, which kind of set the context of this module and also shared already some student approaches and students as partners, approaches and experiences related to this special module. And today we will receive some very much hands-on experiences and testimonials by colleagues from the Trinity Business School. So I'm very honored to have all of you here, and please, Cicely, our main coordinator of the module and our CHARM-ED project, come forward and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sylvie, and heartiest welcome to Nora, Fola, Sive and Declan, our four speakers for today. And set within the context of the CHARM-ED project, the acknowledgement slides, of course, recognises the partnership between Budapest, Barcelona and Trinity, and the funding from CHARM-ED and the moral support and guidance and all of that, but also that the module content and activities of the Enacting ESD module we talked about in the first two webinars were developed collaboratively between 2023 and 24, 6 fellows, 4 student interns, and a wide range of students and staff actively engaged with the development and piloting and beta testing of the workshops. And I do want to acknowledge that our 4 speakers today didn't just start the engagement when they chose to roll out in the School of Business. They started before we ever had a module, and you'll see from the photos they were at some of the beta testing and the piloting of the Enacting ESD staff version of the module we talked about in the first 2 webinars. And of course, to always acknowledge that that work on the module development and piloting and rollout was funded by our higher education authorities, what we call the SATL funding, Strategic Alignment of Teaching and Learning. So just to put it in context that this is the third of 3 webinars. The recordings of the first webinar and the PowerPoint slide deck give the background to the development and the fact that it was set in the context of institutional strategy, national strategy, etc. And as Sylvie has reminded us, the second webinar recording and slide decks also available on the CHARM-EU website was around our students as partners approach. But really today is moving us forward from that CHARM-ED core project focusing on enabling staff to experience and then integrate into their teaching. Today we're somewhat moving on because our 4 speakers take us through their reflections, experiences, challenges as to how did they so quickly move from piloting, finishing in July, to rolling out for real and live to 550 odd students in the following September, 2 months later. So our aim today is to give the floor to them. Dr. Nora Campbell, who is our module leader, will speak first and set the context from the business school point of view. Fola and Sive will take us through their experience as workshop leaders, and they are deliberately today looking at the earlier 2 blocks, and I have one slide to remind us of where they fit in. And then Declan Cal is involved in the module coordination and very much that coordinator of all of their workshop leaders. To remind you that we went from design with the fellows, and I want to point out Carlos seated there in the left-hand photo, and that's Professor Carlos Roca, who conceptualized the fishing game that Fola will introduce to her reflections and is part of block 1, and also the nitrogen game, the nitrogen challenge that you'll hear Sive refer to in her comments. And on the right-hand side, you'll remember if the staff version of the module rolled out from May to July, having been beta testing. That photo on the right was taken mid-July. Circled in red is Nora, and the red arrow at the back is Declan. So they were immersed in it there at the last minute when we remembered to take that photo, etc. So they really bring a wealth of that continuity from concept to actually piloting, working with other staff, and then actually taking the challenge. And a reminder that while the CHARM-ED project focuses on theme 3, block 3, the notion of challenging and questioning our worldviews, perceptions and values related to sustainable development. Whereas, of course, the business school took the whole thing and they actually rolled it out in the sequence that was envisaged by the fellows as the most cogent, coherent, rational way to do so, even though we spoke in the first webinar that they can be separated and run sort of in a horizontal way across a program as well. So to introduce the School of Business passion, I now hand you over to Nora Cahill. No words can capture for me the courage, the passion, the adaptability. I sat in the room as she delivered the theory part of this to 550 students in the room. And the first session I went to, I only got there a few minutes before it started and I had to sit on the steps at the side. It was absolutely packed, and no better person to share with us what they did, how they did it, and then introduce to you Fola, Sive and Declan in turn. Over to you, Nora.
Ceci, thank you for such a warm introduction. And you can see that my name is variously Cahill and Campbell. Declan is my work husband, but we're not married. but we do a lot together. So thank you so much for the chance to share a few reflections with you on the introduction of this module, this ESD module, to Trinity Business School. I'm Nora Campbell. I'm an Associate Professor of Marketing in Trinity Business School, where I lecture and teach. My research area is on the commercial determinants of health, and that's simply, I suppose, at the nexus of health, especially public health and business. And that area has been carved out a lot by both disciplines, and it focuses on the corporate political activity of what's known as the health harming industries, such as alcohol, gambling, and tobacco. You can move on, Cecily. So I wanted to tell you a few words about the business school here, and maybe it'll give you an insight as to why it happened and how it happened that we introduced a module on educating or enacting sustainable development that you know from the last two webinars was designed, and its composition, how it was designed as a cross university venture. So the business school, our business school was founded in 1925. So it's quite an old business school, and it's really integrated with the university. So most of its programs are run as joint programs with the university, our university colleagues. And there are 56 core faculty. So it's about a mid-sized business school. And we have about 2,500 students, the vast majority of which are undergraduate students across a 4-year degree program. So maybe I'll say to you, what's particularly interesting about Trinity Business School and Trinity College in general, and I know this having talked to colleagues across Europe, is that we elect our own deans, we elect our own bosses, our line managers are elected by us, and we elect our own president of the university. So that means that faculty, academic and professional staff vote for who the dean is of the business school. So when that happens every 4 years, it gives us a real chance with everyone with skin in the game to discuss, you know, what are we doing here and what do we want as colleagues. So I don't see my dean as this kind of very distant person. I see him as my colleague that we have a robust to and fro with. So in 2022, we gathered together and said, right, what are we going to do between now and 2030? What are our aims, etc.? And it was crystallized in this phrase, transforming business for good, which I hate, by the way. But like any democracy, we are all in it together, talking about it. And the concept of transforming business for good was an attempt to try and say there are 3 dimensions of business for good that we want to embody in the school. Number 1, business from a moral perspective. So we were just going to be really clear and upfront that we were interested in morality and what is the moral or ethically right thing to do. The second was business performance. So we wanted to we could, I mean, all indices across the world show that productivity is falling, creation and innovation is falling, inequality is rising, and all of this stems back to a business not actually being at the height of its kind of performance. So it hasn't managed to answer the questions that it needs to answer today. And maybe the third element of transforming business for good was sustainability, and the idea of ecological good. And basically the conversation within the school was the majority of us wanted to make sustainability and transforming business for good an ecological message. And I suppose, so this is then how it manifested within the undergraduate program. So we said we wanted to focus on education. We wanted to focus on these values. We wanted to be really clear and have modules dedicated to personal development, so that it's kind of interpolating our students as whole human beings with bodies and communities. And so how were they going to become business professionals when they had to negotiate all of these other things? So they weren't kind of walking brains in vats for us. Emerging in real business educational development, that meant kind of connecting more to the businesses and the communities around us, and to bring our research to the next level. Maybe the other thing that I should say that's not distinct, obviously, in this business school, many European business schools are like it, but it is genuinely research led. So this means we don't tend to have textbooks. We don't tend to follow a set curricula. We leave this kind of sweet spot so that our colleagues during the summer, when they go to conferences, come back and change curricula in real time. So we started having this conversation about what are we going to do to make this third pillar of transforming business for good real in the ecological sense. And maybe I'll tell you, there were three types of kind of tussle or kind of back and forth that we had as a faculty of kind of how are we going to embed ecological good into our curricula at undergraduate and postgraduate level. The first was the conversation of, do you embed it? Do you take every single module and start to sprinkle it with ecological kind of concepts, theories, case studies, etc.? Or do you start designing dedicated modules or even dedicated programs with, that were specializing in ecological sustainability? And I think the two conversations were quite robust, because some of us thought that when you kind of sprinkle in sustainability, it's quite easy to do, but it can end up being very superficial. And from our experience at the time, I was director of undergraduate teaching, what we saw when we audited the undergraduate curriculum is that all of our colleagues, whether they were in finance or accounting or innovation, were doing this kind of sustainability 101. So there was no kind of graduation up at the level of kind of taking the concepts and going deeper and deeper into them. And there was just this kind of, oh, we must talk about climate change, and here's my take on climate change. And so the problem with dedicated modules and dedicated programs was that we felt that the kind of do-gooders of business disciplines like business ethics or to a certain extent strategy will take on sustainability, but the accounting and finance disciplines are the ones that are conceptually quite laggards in this space, so that they could go off and do the kind of business, the real business stuff, while the fluffy stuff was over on the other side. And the second kind of deep conversation was that we were having was on political economy. And essentially, and you will find this in all of your schools and all of your disciplines when you talk about ecological thought and action, that there are kind of two main takes. One, again, is kind of how do we expand, refine, or even contract the concept of capitalism in order to make it about shared value, responsible capitalism, a sort of moral awakening or reawakening of the initial tenets of capitalism. And with all of the associated assumptions in it, such as the market, when it's readjusted in a responsible way, will answer the demand and supply issue, that we can distribute wealth correctly down to the bottom of the pyramid, etc. And there was this kind of camp within the school, and the other camp within the school was, no, our job is to be much more heterodox about the assumptions in the first place. So we need to start thinking and talking and teaching about different forms of organization, not just the corporate entity. So things like cooperatives, mutuals, trusts, foundations, not-for-profits, everything. And we needed to be much more expansive about the idea of supply and demand, and whether we need to move to different types of economies. And the third thing was about execution and operations. And by that, I mean that, and as you probably all know, if you're in universities, there are two approaches to things. One that is so dominant that we have to go back to the start, do a complete curriculum audit, sit down and create this grand plan of how we were going to transform business for good at the undergraduate program level. So that kind of much strategic thought. Or do you go with a much more design thinking kind of mindset where you go in and just start throwing things in and throwing things out and seeing what happens? And I think in this, so these were the kind of three tensions and trade-offs that are happening all the time within business schools, I presume everywhere. And so with the ESD module that we introduced, it was very much in the spirit of design thinking. It was very, so we had a first year program, a mandatory module that myself and Declan, my work husband, ran together. And we decided to take that mandatory first year program and to change it and make it into the incorporate wholesale the Enacting Sustainable Development Program. So within the business school, you need, like every university, we worked with the machinery that we have. So one of the things that we have in Europe now everywhere is learning outcomes. So we changed the learning outcomes for the undergraduate program across the 4 years and across all our 4 programs in order to create the kind of pull and push factors so that faculty were had written this with us, like we all wrote it together, and then we all said in some way we are all going to have to contribute to these learning outcomes. So where you see the italics is where you see the kind of major changes that happened in our program. So we wanted to move to transformational theories, models and practices of business. We wanted to foreground the natural world as well as the political, economic, etc. worlds. But this this became preeminent, and the first thing that we talked about interactive pedagogies, because we had a long conversation at the same time about AI and made a very kind of upfront decision that we were not going to row in with AI. We were going to actually become much more embodied and much more interactive. And probably felt it was more appropriate AI stuff or virtual stuff at postgraduate level. Communicate with confidence, inclusion and respect, attuned to work-life balance, and creatively rise to grand challenges of the 21st century. So the next picture, Cecily, is the picture that we took on, I think, the first day of my taking this module with 560 students. I think that the big learning, if I have kind of maybe 3 takeaways I want to give to you of my big learnings. The first is this thing of the trust chain. So basically, the universities can't run on any other type of way of doing things except trust. And so with that, I brought within this context of transforming business for good, this ESD module to the undergraduate committee. The director of undergraduate teaching and learning, my colleague at the time, said, I trust you that this is the thing that we should be doing. And she in turn went to our dean and said, this is what we're doing. So trust made it a whole lot easier. The same way that within the module itself, I have to trust my co-coordinator, Declan, completely. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And he has to trust all of the seminar leaders who run the workshops. And we work like there's a concept in business and management, hologram organization. So it means that I know what Declan is doing, and when I see he's too busy or he can't do something, I act for him the same way he would act for me, or the same way the seminar leaders would act for him. So we're all moving in and out of these spaces, but we all have really clear idea of what that other person would want or need us to do at the time. The second thing that I would say is the need to move away from additionality within planning for education for sustainable development and towards substitutional thought or subtractive thought. And by that, I mean that within these kind of ideas, there's so much about what we can do. We must do more, more, more. And there's so little conversation on what are we going to do less of in order to make room for the more, more, more. That's the more difficult conversation. And it's the one that really requires really sophisticated, experienced people talking about it and saying, I am going to take the hit for this and I'm going to cut this corner, because we don't have infinite time in the day or time in a curriculum. So that's where the conversation is most important. So Declan and I, in consultation with others, decided to take a 10 credit module and collapse it into 5 credits in order to make 5 credit space for enacting sustainable development. And maybe finally, the third thing I'll say is positioning is more important than content. And by that, I mean our decision within the business school to make this module mandatory and the first module in first year was more important than what was in the module itself. Because what it does is it signals and it sends a keynote to those 560 students that this is the thing we value most. So you will notice when you go around a university and you look at any curriculum in any discipline, the thing that comes first in a first semester is the thing that consciously or unconsciously the school thinks is the most important. So putting things like business ethics or putting things like sustainability as if kind of bolt on or add on or end on, it's actually, you're better off not doing it at all, because what that is doing is sending the counter signal that it's a kind of afterthought to business as usual. So I want to hand you now to my 3 colleagues. Maybe the thing that I'm most lucky is that I have a colleague like Declan, Dr. Declan Cahill, who takes helps me with the curriculum. When I say helps me, he has a very particular role in the school. He is the person who is transitioning 560 students from second level education to third level with all of what that entails. And so he runs the workshops that are associated with these seminars, and the workshops fulfill this dual duty of kind of socializing these students into becoming adults. They are all over 18, and they have to now start taking deep responsibility, so that we don't say take responsibility to them anymore. That's how you know someone is responsible. And then he handpicked these 12 seminar leaders, and he barely ever gets it wrong. So these seminar leaders are today Fola, O'Connell and Saad Crean, and you'll see from their backgrounds and what they're about to tell you why we're so lucky. So over to you, Fola.
Thanks so much, Nora, for the introduction, and Cicely as well. Hi, everyone. As Nora mentioned, my name is Fola. I am a PhD candidate in Trinity Business School, researching marketing and degrowth. And today I'm really delighted to talk to you about the first Limits to Growth workshop, which takes place as part of our Enacting Sustainable Development module here in Trinity Business School. So firstly, I'm going to take you through a kind of whistle-stop tour, I suppose, of the workshop itself and how we've essentially gamified the Limits to Growth so that learners can interact with it on an engaging, collaborative and practical level. This workshop runs for just under 2 hours, and prior to the workshop, the learners will have attended Nora's lecture, Block 1 lecture, which centres on planetary boundary science and donut economics, and they'll also have come prepared, having done some pre-work for us, whether that be reading academic readings, listening to podcasts, or watching different videos. So for this particular workshop, what they do as part of their pre-work is they read the first chapter of Kate Raworth's Donut Economics book. They watch Kate Raworth's TED Talk on how to create a truly healthy economy. They read the second chapter of Donella Meadows' Systems Thinking book. And they also watch a Netflix documentary on the science of our planet with David Attenborough and Johan Rockström. So once they've completed all that pre-work, this enables them really to put their best foot forward going into this first workshop. I like to say, in terms of the first workshop and what we do with them, I see it as being split into kind of two key activities. The first centers on defining sustainability, which focuses really on getting them to do individual, small team and wider group discussion and collaboration. The second then is where we gamify the limits to growth, and we do that through, as Cicely mentioned, our fishing game that Carlos developed. So focusing really firstly on the first activity, we're getting learners to really reflect on their own understanding of sustainability by asking them on a sticky note to write, what sustainability means to them. We then assign them into small teams where they're able to then discuss the similarities and differences that arise across all of their definitions. We then go into a second kind of individual-led discussion first, which is where they write down reasons on their sticky notes on why it's important for them to work in sustainability. And when they come back as part of their small team, they collaborate as a group and they discuss and rank two of the most key reasons for why it's important to work as part of sustainability. So once those kind of two questions are answered, we then bring it back into a wider group discussion setting where learners are then encouraged to share their commonalities and differences in their definitions and actually what they found surprising here as well. We then kind of prompt them further, for example, on temporality to see if that was a feature in any of their definitions. So, for example, we've had kind of great buzz and discussion, I think, in the room when we're talking about, some students have strong convictions that we can only plan for one generation in the future, whereas other students might be more in tune with things like Indigenous thinking and, they might be arguing for 7 generations into the future. So it definitely does create a kind of a bit of a discussion and discourse there. We also then ask the question of sustainable for whom, whether this is living or non-living entities. So, humans, have they referred to humans, plants, animals, the economy, and so on in their definitions. So in terms of this particular activity as a whole, what I've really observed happen in this first activity is firstly because at the very beginning, we say to students, we're leaving embarrassment at the door. We're really, we understand that they're obviously warming up to the university experience, like Nora has said. So, I try and tell them, don't worry about your spelling and grammar on your sticky notes. Don't worry about the definition you do write about whether it's right or wrong. And I tend to refer to the fact that in academic literature, we even have over 500 definitions of sustainability. So, there's no right one universal definition there. And the purpose of this is try and instill some confidence in them, because we do understand that obviously, up until this point, they may have been, this might be their first experience, learning each other's names, being on a name-to-name basis with each other, but also then maybe someone in Trinity instead of sitting in the lecture hall, with 500 other students there. So we understand that it's a new experience for them, and we try to embrace collaboration and cooperation in that particular section of the workshop because of that. And what I actually have observed myself is that once, one student feels confident and shares their understanding and experience, that can then have a domino effect, and others then start sharing as well, and we become a lot more comfortable together. So that's something that I think works really well for this first kind of activity that we do as part of the workshop. For the second activity then, the fishing game, actually when I was reflecting for my presentation today, something I did this year in particular as part of that was I had actually put in a picture in my slides to introduce the fishing game of, it's from the Simpsons movie, of Ned Flanders and Bart Simpson fishing together. And I did so because, I was 10 when that film came out myself. That was my own first experience of, any kind of environmental issue, I suppose. And I used that as the kind of introductory to this section of the workshop. And funnily enough, it did not land at all in the class. So when I asked the students, who's watched the Simpsons movie, not one hand went up. And it made me realize, oh God, these guys, they're probably 18, 19 years old. That film came out in 2008. So, they were only born really when the film came out. So for me and my teaching practices, and I think something to share even when we adapt our teaching practices, that kind of contextual side is probably something to keep in mind here. Now, it worked well because we managed to then have a discussion on, their first, I suppose, experiences with social and environmental issues. So, there was still that element there, but just something that I was reflecting on. So anyways, as we got into the game here, essentially what we were doing was we were tasking students on their sticky notes again to write down a number between 1 and 10, which was going to signify how many fish they wanted to catch from our fictitious ocean in this case. To do this, we gave them a specific purpose. So for this first scenario that we worked on, we told them that your purpose, you're thinking of feeding yourself, you're thinking of feeding your family, and you're thinking of even, perhaps having fish that enable you to trade for alternative food in that context. So we were certainly focusing in on that kind of individual perspective here. So what they did was they write their fish catch number on their sticky note, and when everyone has done that part of the activity, we get everyone to hold up their sticky notes. And from there, we calculate then how many fish have been extracted from our ocean. So two things we don't tell them as part of this activity is, firstly, we don't tell them the carrying capacity of our ocean. So how many fish are actually in total in our ocean. And we also don't tell them the genetic diversity number, which is essentially how many fish we need to have in our ocean in order for that, for our fish stock to renew every round of our game, or what we call the harvest seasons. And what actually happens, I suppose, in this individual perspective, or what I've observed and my colleagues have observed, is that generally after about 3 or 4 rounds or harvest seasons of the game, the fish stock is collapsing. So from here, we have a bit of a discussion with the students about, what kind of happened here? Why did our fish stock collapse? And more importantly, we then talk about, well, what ensures a sustainable existence? What is a sustainable existence? So we get them to write on their sticky notes again the different principles, so they can, I say you can have infinite number of sticky notes for this if you like. So they write down what is a sticky note, what is a sustainable existence on each sticky note, and then they go back into their small teams and they're ranking those from 1 till 3, and then we kind of present them to the wider group. So this gives us then a strong basis, I think, going into the next scenario, which is scenario B. And essentially here we split them down into 2 kind of groups. One is our growth group, one is our longevity group. And essentially, going back to the purpose for the growth group, we're telling them, you're operating as a for-profit company in the competitive environment. You're trying to generate as much, profit as possible. Whereas for our longevity group, we tell them, you guys are a community and you're being tasked with thinking of how do we actually sustainably manage this fish resource in our community. So because of that, the longevity group, they're allowed to kind of have a few minutes to discuss amongst each other on how they would do that kind of sustainable management. Whereas our growth group, because they are in that competitive environment, they sit in silence for those couple of minutes. So then we run the game exactly as we did for scenario A. So they're writing on their sticky note their fish catch. And what generally we've observed, and even speaking with my colleagues, I think that generally this is what happens, is the growth group collapses pretty quickly. So I've mainly observed it happen actually after the second round of the game, whereas the longevity group, the learners, they're so clever, that in that kind of discussion period they try to sort of strategically decide on a number that will enable that resource to renew season upon season. And I've seen it kind of happen successfully where we've ran the game for about 4 or 5 times and the fish stock has not collapsed. So ultimately, because of our time constraints, we don't infinitely run it, but that's kind of what we're seeing. So in terms of my reflections on this particular activity as part of the workshop, I think it works really well for two reasons. So firstly, it makes that kind of theoretical side of the limits to growth more tangible and practical for the learners. So they see kind of firsthand through their experiences in the game that we actually can't infinitely grow on a finite planet, or that we can't infinitely extract, a fish resource from our oceans. And then secondly, many of them do go through a kind of penny drop moment, and you see it in them as they kind of have that realization where this idea that the longevity mindset is trumping the growth mindset, and how actually when we manage a resource sustainably, it not only benefits just society or the environment, but it actually is a benefit to business too. So that's everything that I have that I want to say on the first workshop today. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of today's webinar on the workshop. But for now, I'll pass you over to Nora and my colleague, Sive. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Bola, and over to Sive.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you, Fola, as well. So yeah, I'm a PhD candidate as well, and I'm really looking at how material scientists conduct multi-stakeholder communication during their research. But with regard to this specific talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the nitrogen cycle workshop, and this is related to system complexity and future forecasting. So before the students come to this second workshop, they will have been to the lecture, and they've also have 4 texts that they need to have engaged with. So the first one is the Eat Lancet Commission on Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems. So this is to develop specific targets for healthy diets and sustainable food production, and it also looks at like non-communicable diseases predicted to get worse, and greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, and nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. Also, on top of that, they look at Chapter 1, Donella Meadows System Thinking. So this looks at the interconnections and purposes within systems, moving on to stocks and flows, and then looking at feedback loops, which are the causal connections that change the stock levels within a system. They also read a short and quite engaging text on how a century of ammonia synthesis changed the world by Erisman et al. 2008. And that's looking at the Haber-Bosch process for nitrogen fertilizer. And then finally, they watch a short TED Talk by George Monbiot called Can We Feed Ourselves Without Devouring the Planet? So all this really is to give context and to build up their information on the nitrogen cycle. So at the beginning of each workshop, I usually give them the option to submit anonymous feedback or questions that they have for me, just in case they're not comfortable talking to me directly, which at this early stage they might not be. I also go through the workshop rules. So children, teenagers, adults, at the beginning of every workshop, I go through the rules because it gets everyone on the same page and sets the expectations for the workshop as well. Also, on top of that, at the beginning and at the end of every workshop, I give them their homework just so that they're clear on that. I do think as well, like you'll see throughout this workshop and even with the feedback, that all methods to contact me, multiple methods of engagement, representation, action, and expression. So that's the universal design for learning that we really try to bring in throughout this workshop. So as we move on to the next part of this workshop, we start to get questions sometimes from the students. Well, sure, what have climate science and the planetary boundaries got to do with the business school? And we kind of like to tackle this head on, particularly in this particular workshop because it's so science heavy. So the students discuss this in groups. This is question on the left for about 10 minutes, and I'll wander in amongst the groups, maybe push back if necessary, but usually I defer to their peers and kind of get a back and forth going on why it is important for them. And then in the feedback section, you can see here the slide on the right, we link those UN Education for Sustainable Development Goal competencies to maybe business school concepts that the business school students will be expecting and be more comfortable with. So for example, for anticipatory competencies there on the left, we say, well, this will help you identify risks and opportunities in the future. I also like to highlight, I'm like, well, you guys are the future leaders of the business world, and scientific literacy is very important within that. Then on to the next section of this workshop is context and lead-in activities. So because, again, it's quite complicated, we make sure to go through a number of activities to really get them familiar with the nitrogen cycle, because it is a lesser known biochemical process. So we firstly start out by saying the learning objective, which is what is the environmental cost of food and how we can equitably feed the world's population. It's really important that we make the learning objectives visible, so that the students know what we're working towards, what we're all collectively working towards. So then on the bottom left-hand side there of that, you can see that slide, a fun quiz. So they get a handout on details about the nitrogen cycle, and then they answer questions. They write down their answers to those, so some questions. And then we have an activity 2, which is that I divide the class into groups, and each group draws the nitrogen cycle. And this is fun because I give them markers, I give them stickers, and it's again a different way of learning. One member from each group goes to another group. That group presents the nitrogen cycle. The member comes back to the group, and they make sure that they have all the aspects of the cycle. Finally, it's important because it's scientific, it's a little bit dense, it can be kind of abstract, this particular workshop. We do have a lot of images, and we try to contextualize as much as possible. So that's Loch Ness there, and the issues with nitrification and nitrogen pollution. So this is followed by a break, and then we build up to the nitrogen problem game. So we firstly watch a video on a realistic model of nitrogen flows at our European diet for the current population. And then after this video, we go through on the bottom left there, the different terms to make sure everyone was familiar with what we're asking. Then the students are given a blank nitrogen flow sheet, and they work through the inputs and yields needed for an EU diet in the future, so when the population has increased. And this is great because it really gets them to work through methodically and systematically, like future cast, and really think about what will be needed for a sustainable food system. Because after about 2 or 3 minutes, one of the group cops that we've exceeded our carrying capacity for animals. And the groups need to work out a solution for this, and to make sure basically that the maths lines up. And really it gets, most often the students choose to, they have to choose to increase the protein from plants, and they balance it. This activity takes about 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, and it's a good way for them to really explore the trade-offs in food production capacity, diet and environmental pressure and problems. So then finally, at the very end of this workshop, we have a discussion. So the groups, they pick, or well, I assign them one of 3 topics to talk about. The first topic is balancing. If there is still overshoot in the rebalancing between plant and animal protein, what should we do? Will it be possible to feed the world in 2050? Then the next one is managing and leading change. What would you recommend to government to transition to a sustainable diet in Ireland? And then innovation. Are there technological solutions to dealing with excess nitrogen? What are the benefits and drawbacks to going with technological solutions? These are very pertinent, very relevant questions that we really ask the students to think through in their groups. And it's also directly related to their homework for this particular workshop, is to pick one of those and discuss it in more detail. And it's a nice way to round up kind of finish off the workshop. So finally, I guess my own reflections here are that this workshop, we're constantly revising and adapting based on our experience and student feedback across all of the workshops, but in particular this one, because it's quite different. It's different structure to the following 3 workshops. It's not scenario based. And from my perspective, it's really to increase their knowledge of the biophysical world and its limits. And as such, we have a variety of different learning mechanisms. We have discussion, we have active listening within both the pre-reading and within the workshop itself. And finally, the maths element has not been a problem so far. I honestly thought it would be, but because of the previous workshop, we know who is comfortable with maths. And really, we're getting to know them more and more as each workshop passes. And that's really a key for me, and I think for the other seminar leaders as well, with these workshops. It's really about working with the students and getting to know them and getting them comfortable working with each other. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm delighted to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sive and Fola, before you. And now it gives me the greatest of pleasure to hand the final word to Declan Cal, who has been a wonderful colleague through the whole journey, as I say, from beta testing with our interns through to piloting, and then facilitating any of us that chose to attend workshops or attend lectures as the business school rolled out. Over to you, Declan.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. You can go on to the next slide. I'm not going to talk about myself. Please, thanks a million. Okay, so, you know, really what Nora and the others have said, I mean, it's one word that Nora, she emphasized the word trust. I think that needs to be in very large capitals. The amount of trust that Nora put in myself and the team to do this and run it really has been the success of where we are to date. Just I mentioned there, you've listened to Nora and the other two, Sive and Fola. You can see really they represent what we try to cultivate in the module. We have academic depth, thoughtful engagement, and real attentiveness to student learning. From a coordination point of view, just some basics. There's 180 workshops that we run in this semester, so that's 36 every 2 weeks. And there's 12 leaders, or excuse me, roughly 16 students per workshop. So the numbers are quite large. We do handpick each PhD student. Not all business PhD students. There is a mix and we have some others from across college, and that really works. It really adds a special element to the team. You do need special interpersonal traits to run the workshops. We have developed this side of their personality. Many PhD students are quiet and reserved, but in the right environment and with the right support, they really shine. Recognizing, again, I come from originally the corporate world, spent a lot of time in the corporate world, many different styles of leadership. And we don't ask our team of leaders to fit one model. We ask them to lead in ways that are authentic and effective. Academic excellence is assumed, we assume that. What matters in our workshops is the ability to guide students through very challenging work at times, maintain the momentum, and make sure that nobody is left behind. Next slide, please. That leadership that I mentioned takes time to develop, so that's why we build very strong support around each member of the team. We give them agency. We issue a standard leader pack with briefing notes and a slide deck to ensure commonality really across all 180 workshops in the semester, but that empowers each leader with the freedom and the authority and capacity to make their own choices, decisions, and take independent action as long as they adhere to the basic requirements. This way, their own personality can shine through, and that really, really helps the students. Our crew are very multicultural and a combination of young, a little older, and then very old like me. We train all new members of our crew and get them to shadow another member in a workshop before they start themselves. So that builds up confidence. Okay. The constant contact, I'm constantly accused of maybe doing too much, but we do it between myself and all the members, the team. I joke that we are really more like a tight-knit crew than a formal team. Everybody looks out for one another. This gives each leader additional confidence in their work. And then the last slide, please. So just we focus on really making it personal with the students, as I'm sure you've gathered. Each leader and student work together in each workshop, so it's very personal. As Nora already mentioned, the design and development was done from across college. That really was part of the success, so that everybody is on board in what we were trying to do. And then this semester 1 and then semester 2. So we run the fundamentals of organization and management module in semester 2 with the same crew, the same groups, and the same students, but now they approach business and organization through an ESD lens. So really, that's just a quick run through, and I hand you back to Cecily. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for all of your very intriguing, interesting inputs and sharing your experiences. Before turning to the question and answer, I would like to ask Cicely if she wants to say some rounding up words too, or if we shall jump to possible questions.
I would encourage us to jump to questions and answers. I think the four speakers just give it all to us. And in many ways, Nora and Declan in particular have understated the role they played and continue to play. It is essential to have that combined approach. And I mean, I hope Declan Cal is not unique, that there are clones of him in any other institution that wants to take on such a challenge as 36 workshops every 2 weeks with no more than 17 students in the room, all led by a competent, trained facilitator. So I think leave it open to Q&A, and if there's anything I can contribute, I will.
Thank you very much. So, dear attendees, dear audience, now it's up to you to pose your questions to our esteemed speakers. For now, I cannot see any questions in the chat, so it's gonna be in person then. So please come forward. Don't be shy. If you have questions on the methodology itself or the workshops, perhaps, or the scientific background, we heard about that. A lot of pre-work to be done by students, let's say so, also, to get them prepared. Wow, it seems that, oh, okay, Christina, go ahead, please.
Yes, it's not a question, but I want to make thank you to the speakers, because I think for the presentation, it's interesting to learn about these initiatives and to share them with all of people. And I think it's a good work that can lead to great things. And so thank you for your time and for sharing and for participating in this workshop.
May I ask Christina, what's your reaction to the level of science that Sive and Fola have presented? From the point of view is, Sive, my understanding is, Christina, you're School of Education based. Yeah, and part of the reason of us focusing on the two, what is sustainability and science for this webinar, well, partly because they're what come first, but also that we do see this sensitivity from the arts and humanities, there's too much science, and from the science side, vice versa. Have you any thoughts on that? I think Mihaela is there as well. Is it Tilla? Go ahead.
Yes, I think that Michaela is here. Well, I think that the big question is what is sustainability? Because we have a lot of definitions, and and I think that it is interesting to see different ways for work on it. And the level you can work by a basic level for all people, and then in the discussion you can go deeply in the definition and the different ways for work about it. So I think that is good to have different initiatives.
So, may I say something?
Sure.
Okay. So obviously, we are from the Faculty of Education, so probably some of this content, so it's a little bit far away from what we are focusing on. We are focusing more on the social dimension of sustainability, but nevertheless, so it's very important to have this knowledge as well. And within the Faculty of Education, we also have like different departments that focus on the didactics of of scientific knowledge, no? So how you actually teach students, about scientific knowledge. So obviously this content is also very important for us, and we also know that sustainability implies interdisciplinarity. So it's not only about having a very scientific perspective on this, but also having a social perspective on it, because in this way you can see the consequences, that not following this kind of sustainable perspective may have on the social realm, or on the society as a whole. So I think it's very important for us. But anyway, so Cecily, if these seminars are going to be a little bit far away from what we are actually doing at the Faculty of Education, because it's not the Faculty of Economics, and it's not the Faculty of Science as well. So it's the Faculty of Education, and we very much focus on the social dimension of sustainability. But anyway, like the eco-social dimension of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mihaela. We have Attila's hand up also.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it was very good to see this this workshop, because it gives us as a hope that the sustainability module could be available for all the students also in the ELTE University, and so I think so that the science part could be absolutely understandable for all the students. The question is that if we have enough well-prepared lecturer for this workshop, so that because and what could be a problem in this workshop from my point of view, that at least in Hungary, the incoming students has a very different basic knowledge and attitudes towards sustainability. So because sustainability is actually embedded into the secondary school curriculum, and there are schools which take this very seriously, and so there are some students who are coming to our university with a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills around sustainability, and there are other students who don't know anything about sustainability, and for them this workshop will be a very good start. But for those who are already some kind of expert in sustainability, for them this workshop won't give too much new skills, but it could be also useful for them to make contacts and practice teamwork in that work. Thank you very much.
Sylvia, can you see that Sive and Fola both have their hands up for a while?
Absolutely,
and Jeanette,
absolutely. Yeah. Jeanette comes up next.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I think it's a fantastic module, and I love the collaborative design of it all. And I was particularly interested in what Nora said about it being first year. The positioning of the module was critical. First year mandatory for all business students. I was just wondering, was there any kickback from the business students in particular that they had to take this module and that it was mandatory? And you're looking at concepts of growth or degrowth or whatever. For business students, how did they react to being almost forced to take this module?
Thank you. Saif, Fola, please go ahead answering the question and also reflecting, I guess, on previous questions and comments by colleagues.
Yeah, there absolutely was. I feel like Declan and Fola can also definitely speak to this. There was kickback, hence we introduced that discussion piece at the beginning to try and counter that before it came in too much. I also wanted to say, actually, just on that the cultural context, obviously, for translating these materials is huge, because we know in Ireland, there was studies released recently, there's quite a high trust in scientists and science, but that differs per country. So we're operating under the assumption that we are aware of the secondary school curriculum, the level that a lot of these students are coming in at, and the level of trust that they have in science in the first place. So that would definitely have to be adapted. And I guess it's why we focus on the additional skills like teamwork, presentations, and it's also why we emphasize that in the workshops as well, so that it's like, it's not just about sustainability, it's about these skills that you are developing as future leaders.
Thank you very much, Fola.
Thanks, Hive. Yeah, just to address, I think there's kind of three things that came up there. So, Mihaela, in terms of the focus on the social dimension, I think for us, there is a certain level of adaptability of the workshops, right? And we do generally kind of operate in that sort of social constructivist environment where we really encourage learners to kind of share their own experiences. And like what Sai was saying, and Declan even, about having a multicultural class, what I find really, really effective from that perspective is that, I would have a number of students coming from the Global South who are, very much so sharing the tangible, like what actually happening, the impacts in terms of environmental, sharing that to the students who might be coming from the secondary system in Ireland into third level education for the first time. So we really focus on kind of a student-centered learning there, and I think if you certainly in your education faculty are focusing on that social dimension, I think that will come through excuse me, in terms of the workshops. Varga, I think it's a similar answer there in terms of, the different basic knowledge. I've absolutely seen that in my workshops. Like, we have students coming in who would have a very high level understanding of what sustainability is, and others who, are really, like, they would have, they would be writing down the Brundtland Commission definition for us as part of that first activity. And so definitely we do see that kind of difference in levels of understanding. But again, I think because we really have, like, across all 5 workshops that we run, and there is that kind of discursive element, I think there's certainly a learning from each other that is absolutely key to this. And something we didn't say actually as part of our presentation is that each of these workshops are build part of the assessment for the module. So I think it's around about 13% of their overall grade they get from attending and participating in the workshop. So things we look at are they conceptually strong? Can we really see that they've done that pre-work, whether it's attending Nora's lecture or the various things that I said, like listening to the podcast, watching the videos, and those kinds of things. So that is really kind of a key component for us. And then Jeanette, absolutely, we've had a kickback there. I remember just a quote my students last semester at the very end of our workshops. There was a great kind of buzz and discussion going on in the room, and he said, look, if you want to be a socialist, go to Cuba, to one of his colleagues. So there is that kind of, like, we definitely see this kind of pushback of business students who have chosen a business discipline because they want to learn how to grow a business or sell as much things as possible, and that kind of thing. So there definitely is that. But I think as a kind of sort of a foundation for them, it gets them kind of questioning and challenging the kind of taken for granted assumptions that we have in business. And I've bumped into students I've had from the first iteration, the first time we rolled out the module, where they have said that there's been some impact on where they've gone forward, whether that's things like them being able to identify in future modules that they've taken a kind of tension between sustainability. Like, we're being told that we absolutely have to use AI for this assignment. We have to show exactly every stage that we've used AI. But then, we've kind of questioned, the sustainability of AI maybe through the lens of what they've learned in the ESD module. So, there is definitely those kind of tensions and kick. Overall, it's generally been a positive experience. It's a really nice module for getting them kind of settled into that university experience. I've found, and even the feedback that we receive from students, I think that comes through. So sorry, a lot there, but that's kind of just some of my reflections on the questions that were asked. I'll pass over to Declan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can say it any better than Saib or Fola, but we do a lot of, like, the module, the workshops are, because there are only 16 in it, they're very personal. From the minute they walk in, there's no hiding in the corner. so they have to participate. Now that's difficult for a lot of students, but what we acknowledge that right up front, right at the very start, explain how difficult it is, but that they're in a safe environment within the room, and that what goes on in the room, what's said in the room, stays in the room. We also, at the very first session, which Nora didn't really emphasize, is that we acknowledge the fact that they're in a world that is struggling in so many areas right across the planet. And we acknowledge the fact that they didn't cause this. It's not their fault that we are the way we are on the planet, but that they are the up and coming generation who are going to have a huge say in fixing it. So there's a level of anxiety that comes with that we address right at the very start, and we see that with some of our students where they start to, when the scientific side of it. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I'm a businessman. So from the science side, we're very careful to give an overview without sort of overwhelming them with too much on the science side. We're not trying to be judgmental in what we do. We try and put the facts on front of them, and the workshops use case studies from across the world. Of the 560 students, about 230 of them are from all over the world. So in each group of 16, there's a huge mix, and we run some of the workshops are very sensitive depending on the students. Like we will have Chinese students, Asian students, Indian students, American students, European students, Russian students, Ukrainian students, you name it, we have it in the class, and Irish students. So by putting all that up on the table up front and saying, look, you're now in Trinity, you're in college, this is a different bubble in your life, so you need to learn to engage and participate. The lens, really, from my point of view, because I come from a business background, I talk to the students about this idea that what we're giving them, if they want to go out into the world and make money, okay, this is their idea, that they're going to have a business, they're going to do something, and they're going to make money. But to do that to the best of their ability, they need to be able to look on the world and what the world is throwing at them. And the ESD is a big part of that now out there, and they need to understand that, so that when they're making business decisions, the ESD, as I joke with them, it's like a pair of glasses. You're taking off one pair of glasses and putting on a slightly different color glasses that gives you a different look at the world and what's out there. Yes, the levels of understanding from some of the students come in, and some of them know a little bit more in certain subjects than others. But again, we acknowledge that right up front on day one, and over all the workshops, that tends to balance out a bit, and we know that because they give us anonymous feedback at the end of the semester, and we know from their comments that, okay, some started, it was very difficult, but some finished on a high. And it's really to let them come, and then they come into the business module in semester 2, where they have this understanding from the ESD module. And now we're talking about pure business, organizations, business models, toolkits, and all that sort of stuff. But they have the ESD lens here looking down on what they're doing. And that's really what we're trying to do. I'm not saying we get it right all the time, but it's going well so far. We've run it twice now in the last 2 years, and touch wood, it seems to be going well.
Thank you very much to all of you for this active discussion. We have come to the end of our webinar's time slot for today. So thanks to all our speakers, and thanks to all our attendees for being here with us. I would like to remind you that the slides and the recordings of the webinar will be made available on the CHARM-ED website. And already, if you perhaps missed the first 2 webinars, you can access the previous webinars, recordings and slides. I have put the link in the chat, so please just scroll upwards and you will find the direct link where you can find these resources, but very soon all of the webinars background materials will be made available. It's been a pleasure to host this webinar series. for colleagues in Eötvös Loránd University and the University of Barcelona, please save dates for the teachers webinar, teachers workshop, because Cicely is so kind to visit us during late spring, early summer, and she will facilitate a workshop based on theme 3, so topic 3 of the Enacting Education for Sustainable Development. So there will be also in-person events connected to the CHARM-ED project that we are having. Again, thanks to everyone, and have a beautiful day, a beautiful afternoon.